Hey everyone, and welcome. Nice to see you all here again today. Thank you for joining us on this weekly walk. Now, today on this very lovely late August Wednesday, I actually want to go around the south end of Central Park and explore some of the many bridges and arches that, of course, can be found right here in the park. With that, let's go over the Zoom controls real quick. So, of course, all participants are muted, but of course, you can use the chat feature to say hello and comment. If you want to ask any questions, you can use the Q&A function. And my colleagues, Ryan, Desiree, and our new guide, Carla, they're all going to be on the back end answering any questions if you have them. Closed captioning has also been enabled as well, but you can use the chat feature to turn them off and press hide subtitles. You also see a bunch of historic images on our walk for today. These are going to be taken from primarily the Museum of the City of New York, as well as the archives of the Central Park Conservancy. And of course, our mission here at the park is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. All right, everybody. So today on our walk, we're going to talk about primarily the bridges and arches of Central Park. Now, these architectural features are some of the most recognizable in New York City. And of course, millions of people pass through them every single year. However, what most folks don't realize is that in addition to looking very, very pretty and very nice, they also serve the very utilitarian purpose of connecting various different landscapes together. And they also allow for visitors to transition smoothly from one area to the other. Now, in total, throughout the decades, there's been more than 30 plus bridges and arches created right here in the park since the 1860s. Now, many of them were going to be designed primarily by the main park architect, Calvert Vaux, and his assistant, Jacob Ray Mould. So each one, I think, is definitely a work of art in and of itself. And of course, no two bridges are ever going to be alike. All right, so let's start off with our map. And today we're going to focus mostly on the southern end. So we're going to stay primarily below 65th Street, which is the Transverse Road. But this area, of course, because of the large number of visitors, it's going to have a large surplus of bridges, paths, and other walkways for pedestrians and cyclists. So we've definitely got a lot to see and do here. So, of course, on the walk, let's make our way from Columbus Circle, and then we're going to travel east across the landscape, pretty much following what's called the main drive of Central Park. We're going to examine some of these spans around here, including less well-known bridges like Dipway Arch, Green Gap Arch, and then finally we'll end things off over at the pond where Gapstow Bridge is located. All righty, folks. So right now we are here at the southwesternmost corner of Central Park over at Merchants Gate near Columbus Circle. Now, this area is one of the busier entrances into the park since it's right by a major subway station. And the fact that it's right at the corner of the Upper West Side and Midtown Manhattan, two of the largest and busiest neighborhoods in the city, kind of shows you like just how packed it can get. Of course, this little entrance is going to be capped off by the what's called the USS Maine Monument, basically standing at roughly 57 feet high. It features this really beautiful golden statue of Columbia riding a chariot to victory. All right, so if we go in through the gate itself, we come to this fork in the road. So why don't we go ahead and take the pathway on the left and make our way towards the first bridge of the day. Now, this is what's called Grayshot Arch. Now, this was constructed back in the early 1860s, right as the rest of the park was being built. Of course, as I mentioned, the main architects here were going to be Calvert Vaux and his assistant Jacob Ray Mould. And I think it's a pretty classic design that's in line with some of the other architectural features that they would have created around the park. So definitely, it's got a lot of designs, quite a lot of details to it as well. We'll examine some of these other bridges on the walk for today. But first, why don't we go and examine this particular one right in front of us. So first of all, one thing that you'll notice is right up at the top, basically where the roadway is, you're going to see these very lovely fleur-de-lis patterns up on the balustrade. And of course, you also notice these very fanciful buttresses with lots of little ingenious molding and whatnot. Like so many bridges that were created by Vaux and Mould, Grayshot Arch pretty much utilizes a variety of stone materials that were quarried from the local region. So for example, right above the archway, you can pretty much see right where the Connecticut River brownstone meets with the Fordham gneiss from Westchester County. Gneiss is pretty much the lighter colored stone right up at the top with the nice little lovely markings and patterns, whatever you want to call on there. And then of course you get the brownstone right down here at the bottom. Heading underneath the tunnel, you can see that it's lined with these red bricks from Philadelphia, which was famous at the time for its brick making industry. Bricks as well as brownstone, gneiss, and other masonry materials like schist, sandstone, and whatever else. These are some of the more popular building materials in the park, especially in the 19th century. And you can still definitely see these materials being still in use today around Central Park. By the way, Grayshot Arch also happens to have one of the longest tunnels of any bridge or arch in Central Park, roughly spanning about 50 feet from one end to the other. And that's because right above it, it actually carries what's called the main drive, which is the large multi-use path that most vehicles, cyclists, horse carriages, pedestrians, whatever else, they all use it to make their way around the park. So it's no surprise then that the tunnel under the bridge had to be built fairly wide in order to accommodate all these people right above it. Okay, so let's keep heading up the pathway and we're going to meander through the area a little bit more. So from here, we're going to make a left turn over towards the next stop. Now, this bridge that we're taking a look at isn't too far away from Grayshot Arch. In fact, it'll probably take you all of 30 seconds to get here from Grayshot. Now, this span is called Pine Bank Arch, and compared to the other bridges that we'll take a look at today, this one is going to be a little bit more unique. So first of all, the materials here are going to be slightly different. So instead of being made mostly out of stone, Pine Bank Arch, this is going to be created using cast iron. And of course, you can really definitely see that from the top of the bridge where you're more up close to it. Now, this is going to be one of the 7 cast iron bridges built right here in Central Park. Today, only 5 remain, and Pine Bank Arch pretty much represents one of the last remaining ones just south of 65th Street. Cast iron was a relatively new construction material at that point in time in the 1860s. It was favored mostly because it was pretty much cheap to obtain, and it was also very easy to work with compared to stone blocks. Now, with cast iron, the designers had a little bit more leeway to add ornamental designs and patterns like the ones that we're looking at up here on the railings. Now, if we take a look just off towards the east underneath the bridge, we can see right where the bridle trail kind of terminates. Now, this rocky, gravelly trail traverses through much of the length of the park all the way up to the reservoir, and it's, of course, pretty popular these days with joggers. The path basically ends here after a few miles, pretty awkwardly, I would say. The reason for that primarily is because that at one point, the bridle trail actually used to travel all the way out to the main southeast entrance of Central Park over at Grand Army Plaza. So it would have run right through here, where it had, of course, the very important task, basically welcoming visitors on horseback coming in from 59th Avenue. Now, by the 1930s, because most folks really weren't riding horses into the park as much, the Parks Department then would have closed off certain sections of the bridle trail in order to allow for nearby Heckscher playground to be expanded. So they decided to terminate it right here in this spot. In fact, if you take a close look over in the background, behind all these shrubs, you can see that the playground is very much visible. All right, everyone, let's go ahead and move on now. And of course, one thing that I really like about walking around the south end of the park is the really incredible view of the city all around you. Being this close to some of the tallest skyscrapers in the planet while still being inside of a bucolic, naturalistic park environment, I think really can be quite a surreal experience at times, especially if you are a first-time visitor to Central Park. Okay, folks, so we've so far gotten a quick taste of the small variety so far of the different arches and bridges, but let's continue and explore some more here in the southern end. Now, just south of the main route for today, you'll find this tiny little bridge that's easily overlooked by a lot of park visitors. This is what's called the Dipway Arch, and it welcomes folks entering from 7th Avenue, essentially leading them north towards the carousel via the promenade. So you can imagine like just how many people would actually use this on a day-to-day basis, especially for folks visiting from 59th Street and 6th Avenue. Now, like most of these spans that were created by Calvert Vaux and Jacob Ray Mold, Dipway Arch basically uses a lot of different materials, including brick and even cast iron, especially right up on top with its railings. Primarily, however, Dipway Arch is going to be made out of granite, which is going to be actually quarried from the state of Maine. Now, folks, granite is definitely one of the hardiest construction materials that we have here in Central Park. There's actually a reason why, compared to, let's say, some of the other bridges that were made out of other materials, like, say, maybe cast iron, Dipway is a lot more intact and in much better shape than most. The granite has basically survived the everyday wear and tear of the urban environment, even after more than 160 years. Take note also of how the blocks kind of alternate between the very smooth ashlar and the more rough-hewn bush-hammered stone. This, I think, is a very, very unique bridge that is, not really comparable to anything else around the park. Now, if we take a look inside, you'll notice these brick arches along the abutment or the side walls of the bridge. These days, they're mostly ornamental, but when Calvert Vaux designed Dipway Arch, he actually included these arches to provide shelter for women and children during times of rain or perhaps maybe excessive sun. These are what's called, quote unquote, ladies' seats. And apparently, each one would be just large enough for a Victorian woman wearing a very large hoop skirt, and plus maybe 1 or 2 children in tow. Which I think is always kind of a fascinating. This actually I just learned about, just kind of like doing research for this program. But I think it really is kind of amazing that we still have access to this kind of history in Central Park. All right, folks, it is that time now, and you know what it is. It is time to conduct our first poll of the day. So let's go ahead and pull up the poll right now. So today, on our poll, I wanted to ask, do you have a favorite bridge, arch, or span in Central Park? Now, as some of you might know, there are, of course, quite a lot of these bridges. So obviously, I did not include all 30 whatever plus bridges that we have here in the park. I can't really include all of them, but I've included at least 10 of them here so far. So you might see classics like Bow Bridge, or perhaps maybe Gapstow Bridge. For me personally, my favorite would probably be Gothic Bridge, also known as Bridge number 28. That one's up by the reservoir. I like it a lot primarily because of its shape. All right, so it looks like mostly we've all voted. So let me go ahead and end off the poll and let us share the results. And not surprisingly, coming up on top by far is Bow Bridge at 45%. Bow Bridge definitely is one of the most iconic bridges, not just in Central Park, but probably in the whole entire world. Bow Bridge definitely kind of ranks up there. However, since we are focusing mostly on the southern end of the park, we're not really going to be taking a look at it for today. But some of the other bridges that did kind of come up on top would include a Gapstow Bridge over at 62nd Street. We'll actually talk about this particular bridge later on. All right, folks, so let's go ahead now and continue on with our walk. So from here at Dipway Arch, let's go ahead and continue on. So we'll take this promenade down towards the next stop on our tour. And of course, over on our left-hand side, rather right in front of us, we can see the carousel building. Just off towards the east, we'll find our next bridge. So let's go ahead and examine it right now. All right, folks, now this is what's called Playmates Arch. And I think it's a very fitting name since we're standing right at the heart of the children's district of Central Park. Now, if you recall from some of our previous weekly walks, the children's district was basically set up back in the 1860s in order to open up the early park to younger visitors. So the commissioners at that point in time and the designers would have added things like the carousel, the playground, as well as the nearby dairy building, basically to make the area a little bit more child-friendly. And since the area had a lot of hills and paths and roads, bridges and arches were going to be especially useful for connecting all these different attractions together. Like the other bridges that we've seen, Playmates Arch basically uses a variety of different materials. So right up at the top where the main park drive goes right through, you can see these railings, and of course, they're going to be made out of cast iron. These cast iron railings are actually only just a replica. The originals were actually destroyed back in the 20th century when a car actually slammed right into it. This back in the days when you can actually drive your car into the park. Back in 1989, we then did some restoration efforts to the bridge as well as the rest of the landscape. Note also the trimmed New England granite blocks, especially right where the keystone is at the top of the arch. And inside, taking a look up, you'll see these alternating stripes of red brick from Philadelphia, as well as yellow brick quarried from Milwaukee. It creates this really striking pattern that feels almost unreal when you're walking underneath. With all these materials and colors coming together, it's no wonder then that early park visitors actually once called this the, quote, tri-colored highway. All right, and once we make our way out of the tri-colored highway, so to speak, we then come to what's called the dairy building, just right up ahead. We'll take the left turn from here, and we'll go on towards the next few stops on our walk. Now, here in the park, we have 4 of these transverse roads, basically taking normal city traffic from just outside the park. And it takes folks from the east side of Manhattan to the west side, or vice versa. And basically, they were carved below street level in order to allow visitors and other pedestrians this uninterrupted experience while walking around the park. Now, these roads were never really meant to be seen in the first place, and the spot where we're standing above right now is technically one of the park's many bridges. However, these are not officially counted as one of the main ornamental bridges. So they're not going to have nice fancy names or any ornate designs or anything else like that. Here at the Transverse roads, these bridges and arches are going to be purely utilitarian through and through. Okay, so continuing on, just off towards the north, right across the main drive, you can see the entrance into the mall. Now, since the 1930s, this area really has changed quite a bit. While it may look rather flat and level, there are actually quite a lot of rock outcrops here. And in the early days of the park's history, these rock outcrops have served as kind of like a segue into the mall and sheep meadow landscapes just off towards the north. So right here where we're standing in this very spot, more than 100 years ago, you would have found this old stone arch that actually did this same exact purpose of acting as a segue into the northern edges of the mall. Now, this particular bridge that we're looking at here in the image, this is called Marble Arch. And unfortunately, this is one of the lost architectural elements of Central Park. It actually would have sat right here just north of the dairy, and it would have carried the main drive above it with its many horse carriages and vehicles. Marble Arch provided access to the mall to the north via these 2 sets of stairs that were accessible on the left and right-hand sides. It was basically constructed entirely out of limestone marble from Westchester County. It really had this reputation of being a very elegantly designed bridge, even amongst all the other bridges in Central Park. Basically, its primary purpose was to provide shelter for visitors, in addition to connecting the landscape together. So it did have things like masonry benches. You can also see this nice rounded niche just off towards at the end. And it also features a nice little water fountain right at the center. It's kind of definitely hard to see this former water fountain, but it's right in between where these 2 people are actually standing. Now, here we have an illustration of what the interior of that former arch would have looked like. Again, note the domed niche over at the end. You might be able to also see some of these steps that lead up to the mall promenade just off towards the left. So right where the mouse is going to be. Again, now also take note of the arches on the wall that allowed families to rest in times of inclement weather. Of course, we saw this same feature earlier on when we were examining Dipway Arch. Now, by 19 34, Marble Arch was basically torn down by Parks Commissioner Robert Moses, who wanted to improve automobile traffic in the park. So unfortunately, Marble Arch did get in the way, and very sadly, it's been lost to us since. All right, folks, we're quickly approaching the last few stops on our walk. And from here, I'd like to go ahead and examine two more final spans that I think are important to us for today. Now, just right off the dairy building, if we keep heading south, you'll find this roadway that basically connects Grand Army Plaza with the rest of the park drive. Now, this used to be the main entrance for folks looking to take their car or vehicle into Central Park. Of course, you can't really drive around the park anymore, so these days you're more likely to see things like pedicabs, horse carriages, official vehicles, park visitors, tourists, whatever else. Now, taking a very closer look at the railings off towards the side, you'll notice that it is actually really quite decorative, and it does actually feature a lot of these tiny little details in the carvings. And that's because the road that we're currently walking along is carried by yet another one of these ornate arches designed by Box and Mold. From here, there's actually a set of stairs and steps leading down. So let's make our way down these steps and get a better view of the bridge. All right, folks, so this is actually what it looks like from right below. Now, the sandstone bridge is called Green Gap Arch, and the bridle trail used to actually make its way right through here. So folks on horseback would be able to pass through here all the time in order to get to Fifth Avenue. The tunnel of the arch would actually lead out to Central Park Zoo just off towards the east, but after restoration efforts back in the late 1980s, it was then closed off. And then the zoo nowadays actually uses it as a storage, hence the large gates over at the bridge. All right, so from Green Gap Arch, let's go ahead and take this pathway over towards the next and last stop on our walk. We're gonna go ahead and make our way towards the pond from here. All right, and of course, right from the shoreline, we get this very lovely view of one of the most famous bridges in all of Central Park. This is Gapstow Bridge. Now, you might have actually seen it before in films like maybe Home Alone 2 or perhaps maybe The Devil Wears Prada. And I think one reason that it's so famous is that it's so easily accessible to visitors entering through the main park gates of 59th Street. The construction material used here is going to be Manhattan schist, which of course is the same type of rock that can be found all around us here in the park. Now, unlike all the bridges that we've seen so far, this one really wasn't actually designed by the original architects, Box and Mold. It was actually added much, much, much later on in 1896. So a few decades after all the originals were built up. Originally, Gapstow Bridge looked very different, radically different, I would say. Now, this is the version of the bridge that was designed by Calvert Vaux back in the 1860s. Now, take a look at this very, very carefully. It was made out of primarily cast iron and wood, but since those are materials that do deteriorate over time very quickly without proper care and maintenance, it definitely rotted away after only a few years, and it then had to be replaced with the current stone bridge. Now, here's a closer view from just underneath, right by the water. Again, note the large blocks of Manhattan schist that they used for Gapstow Bridge. Now, even though it's not an original feature of Central Park, this bridge was designed with a very bucolic and naturalistic feel to it. So I think at least Olmsted would have been happy with its design. All righty, everybody. Right now, I think this is a good place to kind of end off our walk. So we've been going around the south and examining all the different bridges and arches and spans here so far. Now, as we've seen, each one is going to be unique, and no two bridges or really any other architectural elements are going to be alike in Central Park. These truly are some of those spectacular architectural features really anywhere in New York City. And of course, I hope that you've learned just a little bit more about these lovely gems with me here today. All right, everybody, so that does it for this week's walk. Now, don't forget to join us tomorrow for our virtual tour called A Walk Through the Wild Flowers, where we'll examine the park's lesser-known wild gardens and learn how they provide food and shelter to essential pollinator species like bees, hummingbirds, whatever else. Now, this virtual program is free, so be sure to please check it out. Now, you can follow the link in the chat for more details. Again, thank you so much for joining us on the walk today. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as YouTube. You can check us out with our handle at Central Park NYC. And of course, we'll leave the room open for any last final questions. But otherwise, from all of us here at the Central Park Conservancy, stay safe and be well. Have a good day, folks.